In the late stages of working on Fire Punch, author Tatsuki Fujimoto was spitballing ideas for his next manga. He settled on the idea of a man who had a chainsaw for a head, not because he knew it would develop into a complex, character-driven story about trauma, manipulation, and the hierarchy of needs, but because he thought it would be cool if a guy could turn into chainsaws and fight demons. This initial idea is what would eventually become Chainsaw Man, and despite being famous for its fantastic writing and deep themes, this cool factor remains at its very core. And evidently, the fans love it, as on its opening weekend, the Reze Arc movie topped the box office in America. To find out why, let's delve a little deeper into Chainsaw Man's rule of cool. It's hard to talk about Chainsaw Man without discussing spoilers, so here's how this video is gonna go. I'll focus entirely on the events of Season 1 to begin with, before examining the movie, the rest of Part 1, and finally Part 2. These sections will be clearly marked with timestamps, so feel free to hop out at any point if you're not caught up. Alright, let's begin. So the rule of cool started as a tabletop RPG term, which allows the game master or the players to bend the predetermined rules of the game for the sake of cool moments. More recently, this mindset has spilled over into fiction as a whole, where writers or directors will prioritize coolness to generate momentary hype in their stories. This is a double-edged sword though, as the overall narrative can suffer as a result, breaking the audience's immersion. Stories are often seen as either deep and emotional, or cool and entertaining, rarely striking a good balance between the two. There's a reason directors like Tarantino and Christopher Nolan are often cited as people's favorites, and their work is usually both a critical and financial success. So how does Chainsaw Man find this balance? Well, by nature, a guy who can turn into chainsaws is gonna be cool. There's a reason the chainsaw is an iconic weapon in action and horror movies alike. Combine this with a Wolverine-style setup where Denji can summon these blades from his arms, and you have a recipe for a seriously cool ability.
I like this!
Yeah, I know if you do anything any more manly, you're in danger of making yourself pregnant.
This is why the Zombie Devil is such a good introductory fight to show off this ability. Since the opponents are no longer alive, seeing them get torn up doesn't feel as gory or off-putting. You can rip and tear without inflicting too much suffering, essentially putting them out of their misery in the most brutal way possible. There's a difference between action gore and horror gore, and Chainsaw Man dances along this fine line in multiple ways. Instead of illustrating every organ in disgusting detail, Denji's opponents tend to explode into ribbons of guts, displaying brutality without making it too graphic. Additionally, the fact that his ability hurts to use, splitting his arms in two each time the blades are summoned, adds that little sprinkling of edge without going into "I break all my bones every time I move" edgelord territory. Another cool ability present in Chainsaw Man is regeneration, which allows characters to take significant, usually fatal damage, but still continue the fight. This trait is often reserved for the big bad in most anime, but by giving it to the protagonist too, every fight becomes a visual spectacle of bloodshed. But what are some cool aspects beyond just the protagonist? Well, like a lot of modern shonen, Chainsaw Man uses visual iconography as part of its power system. By this I am referring to distinct poses or motions that are associated with certain abilities. Think of the hand symbols used for domain expansions in JJK, or the full body poses that Luffy strikes for each of his gears. These simple motions are so iconic they transcend the digital medium, referenced by fans around the world, from cosplayers to famous athletes. So what are some examples within Chainsaw Man? Well, this one comes to mind.
Cool.
But it's especially prevalent with the hybrids, as each of them has a unique trigger to activate their transformation. By personifying fears, Chainsaw Man's power system lends itself very well to this cool factor, to an almost childishly simple level. You could imagine a group of kids asking each other questions like, who would win in a fight, a chainsaw or a sword? Here's another one, what about sharks versus zombies? This simplistic stance lets the viewer quickly grasp characters' abilities, as they are tied to the fears they represent. On the topic of simplicity, Chainsaw Man's design is very simple in itself. Fujimoto could have gone way further with the concept, having Denji's transformation be fully armored or sprout countless more chainsaws from his body, but he kept it to just his limbs. After all, a simpler design is much more memorable, and easier to draw for both the author and fan artists alike. It's why designs for characters like Optimus Prime keep returning back to the blocky G1 roots, instead of the more jagged and edgy Bayformers look. Speaking of Michael Bay, he's a good example of a director who follows the traditional rule of cool. After all, Fujimoto loves good and bad movies alike, so it's fitting to discuss a more divisive vision here. Bay has always seemed to value spectacle over story, and public opinion of his Transformers movies seems to have been turning in his favor recently, as viewers begin to appreciate the Bayhem. There's no denying he's at the very least a visual auteur, but what his movies lack is the connective tissue between these grand action set pieces. Chainsaw Man's twist on the rule of cool works so well because the time between the cool moments is also very well written, which deepens our investment whenever things do kick off. It's not just hype moments and aura. The context of what came before and how it affects the characters elevates each scene. So with that said, there's a couple more details I'd like to go over in Season 1 before we jump into spoilers. Early on in the story, the Fox Devil is shown to be incredibly effective at dispatching devils, but when faced with the hybrid Katana Man, it's easily beaten. Showing a previously busted ability get rinsed by a new threat is good power escalation, and consistently ups the stakes throughout the story. I think it's also very fitting that Katana Man's signature move is to dash through his opponents, slicing them before they realize they've been caught. He's a very traditional edgelord, motivated by vengeance with a teleports behind you type moveset, which is something you'd expect from a guy made out of katanas. By setting him up as the first recurring villain, it almost feels like Fujimoto is writing him as a tongue-in-cheek caricature of a more angsty shonen protagonist. Now let's dive into spoiler territory with the Reze movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, this is your cue. I'm going to be skimming over the first half of the movie, but that doesn't mean it's unimportant. By having a slower pace and more romantic storyline, I'd even say it's pivotal for the final act of the movie. But the cool moments begin with Reze fighting back against the assassin. It's a complete inversion of the damsel in distress trope. A less skilled writer would have her die here, or make Denji swoop in to save the day, but Reze flips the script on its head, setting herself up as the true threat. I saw a post about this moment asking, why does Reze leave her eyes open in the rain? Is she stupid? No, she's cool, and probably dissociating right now. The Bomb Devil trigger is probably the coolest in the story, and brings all of the elements I mentioned earlier into one legendary moment. You have the iconography of pulling the safety pin, the self-damage from the explosion, followed by regen and some aura farming, all in the space of just 2 pages. Denji later answers this challenge with the Sharknado sequence, but instead of turning a dramatic moment into something cool, he does the same with a comedic moment. The image of a man made of chainsaws riding a shark into a typhoon should be the visual definition of badass if it isn't already. Now let's tackle the manga, starting with the rest of part 1. The International Assassin's arc is chock full of iconic moments, but it all starts with Quan Chi's killing spree. She is a literal blur for the first half of the chapter, leaving bystanders confused and unaware of what's already happened to them. As the victims fall apart, she slices through the very panels of the manga. This is a classic anime moment ramped up to 11, like Katana Man's move, but actually cool because it's performed by a lesbian. The Darkness Devil's introduction is probably a top 3 most iconic panels in Chainsaw Man, for good reason. But why the astronauts? Well, for one, it looks cool as hell, but it also symbolizes humanity's helplessness when confronted with the cold, dark, uncaring void of space. They're arranged like a royal procession, as even those at the peak of humanity are nothing to a primal fear. The squad is helpless when faced with darkness, immediately losing their arms. Not only is this another cool moment, but it's symbolic as darkness is robbing everyone of their sense of touch, which is what we instinctively rely on when we lose our sight. In the final fight against the Doll of Darkness, Denji setting himself on fire is an automatic rite of passage for badasses. Just take Jolene for example, and the flaming kick is a really slept on panel in my opinion. I struggle to describe anything in the Gun Devil arc as cool since it's so tonally different from the rest of the series. Most events are either terrifying or gut-wrenching, but Makima one-shotting the Gun Devil with a contract merchant combo was very cool, in the same way Katana escaping Fox was cool. It's just another escalation, fully setting up Makima as the true final villain of this saga. Pochita is probably the most traditional badass in the series. He spends half his time posing while the remains of his opponents rain down on him. From a character design perspective, he is the Bay foremost to Denji's G1, darker, edgier, and more complex. But what makes the moment cool is that he's not a traditional rage power-up or demonic takeover like we see in other stories. Denji himself is mentally down for the count, having lost the will to live, so Pochita is more like a dark guardian angel here, executing his wrath for the pain Denji has been put through. As for the fight, he completely outmatches everyone, blitzing every hybrid we've seen up until this point. I'm not going to analyze the entire fight or we'll be here all day, but a standout moment that encapsulates the coolness is Vegeta throwing his heart back to Earth after being blasted into space, and fully regenerating. But the final showdown between Makima and Chainsaw Man might just be even cooler, since they can both regenerate. Seeing them recover from fatal damage over and over makes this one of the coolest fights I've ever read. And Makima reviving Chainsaw Man with her own blood, like, I know I'm trying to kill you right now, but I'm not satisfied yet. Get up. The climax of part 1 is just beyond compare. But now, let's move on to... Part 2 is going to be less focused as it's still ongoing, but I'll start with Yoru, as her ability to turn anything into a weapon is awesome, and leaves so much room for creativity. To solidify this first impression, Chapter 1 ends with a cool devils don't look at explosions moment. Another cool use of this ability was the creation of the chainsaw bike, which is seemingly surface level coolness at first, but is called back to later on in the story with the bicycle date. Also, the entire fight against Falling was awesome. Fujimoto is always in his bag when it comes to primal fears. Driving a chainsaw bike through a crumbling skyscraper is the Sharknado moment of part 2 for me. There are many other cool moments throughout, like Quan Chi being her usual badass self, or Denji cutting through his own body to escape a grapple, but the fights between War and Chainsaw stand out to me the most. Gun Devil, the main threat in part 1, becomes a mere tool for its possessive mother, showing how much more of a threat she is. But even then, her bullets are easily stopped by another primal, the Aging Devil. Aging's Throne of Suffering is so metal. It's like something from an album cover, but there's some great symbolism too. We're all slaves to time, forced to carry a decaying body on our backs until the end of our lives. As we approach the end of part 2, War and Chainsaw are reaching the peak of their power, giving us another visual spectacle like the fight with Makima. While I was writing this, Fujimoto served us another fantastic chapter with 219. I gave my full thoughts in my chapter review, but with Death erased, who knows how this fight is gonna pan out. In conclusion, Chainsaw Man's formula works so well because it is built around ideas that are just plain cool by definition, but add layers of depth, character development, and world-shaking twists, and you get a story that is truly stunning. That is Chainsaw Man's rule of cool.